Hello, thank you for joining me. I realise that many of you couldn't be with us this afternoon to say goodbye to my wife Christine, or Chrissy as we all used to call her, and so John and I decided we would film this and perhaps it would help me feel connected to you, just for today. John's our son, he's filming it, he's not got a clue what he's doing with the camera, so it might be a bit judgery and you never know what's going to happen. And I wish you could see him because he's a spitting image of me, poor lad, except for the fact I tell him he hasn't got as much hair and he's got a bigger tummy. But he says that that's just a silly old dad joke. This afternoon, after the service, I told the vicar that I was going to do this. And she said that I should write down what I wanted to say to you. I should get it printed out and then I'd have it in front of me and it would make sure that I didn't leave anything out. And might help me focus, might even help me stop crying. But then if I did cry, it didn't matter, because it's that sort of day, isn't it? I hope you don't hear that the neighbour who's mowing his lawn at the moment, but the traffic goes past and he mows his lawn and life just goes on, doesn't it? Anyway, I don't often take much notice of what vicars say, especially lady vicars, but Christine really loved this one. She was kind and gentle to her, and so out of love for my wife and respect for the vicar, I've got it all written down. I hope you don't mind. I'm just going to read it. Thanks. Chrissy and I were childhood sweethearts. We met in the first year at grammar school, and I think we fell in love immediately. We started dating the very first weekend after we met, which meant a lot of fumbling and kissing and cuddling on the back row of the local cinema on Saturday evening when I wasn't playing cricket or rugby. Things came to a head on a fifth form trip to Paris one December, just before Christmas. It was wonderful. We were alone in this romantic city. We'd had a glass or two of red wine and we were desperately in love with each other. And for the first time, we made love. Not just the first time for either of us, but the first time for both of us. To cut a long story short, I'm sorry. I can't do this. You knew Christy. She was the most generous, warm-hearted, funny human being I've ever met in my whole life, and just to reduce her to some smart, clever words on a piece of paper isn't fair. So I'm not going to do it. I don't care what the vicar says. I'll just have to try and remember it, and if I don't remember it, you won't know, will you, because you've not read it, and if I cry, then I cry. We'll just cope. To cut a long story short, Chrissy became pregnant that first time in Paris. We came home and our parents were overjoyed. They knew we were destined to be together. We got married in the following February when we both became 16, and with the school's help and support, we took our O-levels in the July, and after taking her final O-level, Chrissy gave birth to our wonderful son, John. We wanted to go to university. We both wanted to become teachers. Chrissy wanted to be a science teacher. She was mad keen on physics all the time. And I thought I was going to be the greatest writer of English since Charles Dickens. And so I wanted to study English literature. And we wanted to go to Exeter. So we needed to get good grades. Our parents supported us and the school supported us. We took little John into lessons sometime. I think we were the only parents in the sixth form that year. And we got our grades. Chrissy, of course, got A stars all the way through. And I didn't do too badly. I did well enough to get into Exeter, so that's not bad, is it? And off we went. swinging little John between us. From the very beginning, Chrissy was a star. I think she was probably the best student, I should say, shouldn't I, that the department had ever had. She was just wonderful, keen, intelligent, hard-working, and I realised that I wasn't going to be a great writer. In fact, realised I probably wouldn't even be a writer at all. And so I decided to do what lots of people do when they can't do something. I decided to teach it. And so I had to stay on and get my qualifications. And we did. Chrissy got a first, with distinction. It was no surprise to anyone. And I got a 2-1, which I was over the moon about. The university persuaded Chrissy to stay on and do her masters, and so John and I stayed in Exeter with her to support her. She would go in almost every day, and I would spend my time taking care of John and learning all of Shakespeare's sonnets forwards and backwards and most of the monologues. I became a real Shakespeare geek, I'm afraid. And of course Chrissy got her masters. Fabulous, fabulous distinction masters. And off we left. Off into the big bad world of teaching. By this time, John was 7 years old and he'd already done 4 years at university. We were very fortunate. We both got posts at the grammar school that we were pupils at, although it wasn't a grammar school anymore. It was now a comprehensive school. All the staff loved her. She was inspirational. The pupils loved her, the parents loved her, the governors loved her. Everybody thought she was fantastic. I muddled along, and I took some coaching in cricket and rugby and enjoyed that. And John eventually went to the same school. Chrissy did her PhD in her spare time, and then a few years later, it was as Dr. Christine, she became the first principal, the first female principal of the college. Even Ofsted fell in love with Chrissy. The reports were always glowing, excellent in everything. It didn't matter whether it was sport, it didn't matter whether it was the humanities or science or pastoral care. They even singled Chrissy out for special praise, saying that the school were lucky to have such a natural-born leader. Of course, I used to tell her that she wasn't a leader at all, she was just an organiser. At least, she used to organise me. So it'll come as no surprise to any of you who knew her that once we received the diagnosis of Alzheimer's and we'd sobered up, Chrissy set about organising the rest of our life together. We knew that we wouldn't have as much time that we planned. She started by organising today. She chose the church and the vicar. She chose the readings and the hymns. She even chose her own coffin. And this stupid jacket and collar and tie that she forced me to wear. And what you can't see, what she used to call my lucky boxer shorts. But I knew she wasn't organising me. No, she was just doing what she always did, for all of us, helping us, trying to make it all just that little bit easy. She knew today would be a horrible day for me, and so she was just trying to take some of the burden away from me. She said we had to have a new bucket list. We'd written one a couple of years before. We were hoping to take early retirement and go around the world, but now that would all change, wouldn't it? I can see it now, even clearer than the piece of paper with the speech on. It was headed, little A5 piece of paper, headed New Bucket List in response to Alzheimer, the well-known Egyptian psychologist trying to steal my mind. 1. Visit John and his wonderful family in Australia. 2. See the polar bears
on the way to visiting John and his wonderful family in Australia. 3. See St. Petersburg in the snow on the way back from visiting John and his wonderful family in Australia. 4. Visit John and his wonderful family in Australia. 5. If we've got enough time left, kill Tony Blair. and I know the beast is still at large. But we did all the rest. Not St. Petersburg. That was my bucket list, and I can do that anytime, can't I? And I think we visited John so often that he and the kids and his wife must have thought we'd emigrated and moved in next door. We went over and over again until Chrissy couldn't fly anymore. You see, there's no knowing how fast Alzheimer's will affect somebody. Sometimes it's quite quick and rapid and they deteriorate over a very short period of time. Other times it's very slow and it takes a long time, and other times it's a combination of both. The only thing you can be certain of is that you are going to die. At first, of course, it wasn't obvious. And she kept going in and doing little bits of work in the school. She was still able to talk to the pupils, even if she didn't always remember their names, and she could still do a little bit of admin and talk to other members of the staff, and it kept the grey cells going, kept her mind active. Just she was still contacting, she was still out there in the world. But eventually it became obvious, and she had to leave. And so I did as well. We decided that when the time came for her to leave, I would, so that we could spend all of the time that we had together. I mean, I tell you, you might think this is really sad. We've lived in this house for the last 35 years. And we used to do something every single Friday night that we were at home. Really silly. We used to, after school had finished, we used to get in the car, we'd go to the local Tesco's, and we'd do our weekend shopping. And we used to play two silly games. The first one was, while we were going round with our trolley, we each used to try and slip things into the basket without the other one noticing. They were little surprise gifts for the weekend to each other. The second game was trying to slip things into other people's baskets and trolleys as they were going round. Chrissy used to like and spot a vegetarian, and then she'd slip sausage rolls and pork pies and cold meat into their baskets, and we'd giggle like naughty school kids when they got to the checkout and complained that their vegetables were contaminated. I can remember the last time we did this together. She still played the game, although it was obvious to everybody what she was doing, but they all just humoured her. And we got to the checkout, and she said, "Michael, I'll pay for this. You go get the car." And she took our remote control, TV remote control, out of her pocket. She passed it to the young girl on the checkout, and she said, "Here you go. Take it out of that." And then she just turned, grabbed hold of the basket, and walked out. And they were wonderful. They didn't call us back, didn't stop us, they didn't follow us into the car park, they just let us go. Of course, the next day I went straight back to pay for what we got, and the manager came out and he said, no, it's all right, Michael, I'm a pupil of yours, I was a pupil of yours. We know what's going on. Tesco's can afford that trolley of food. And you're probably going to need this to change channel on your television. So you see, there were lots of laughs, and you have to find them. And she loved laughing. I only had to smile at her and she would burst out into silly schoolgirl giggles. She just loved hearing people laugh. I can remember at the beginning, when she wasn't so bad, I was able to leave her on her own for a couple of hours in the evening sometimes. And I got a part-time job at the local college, teaching English literature in the evening to mature students. I came back one evening and I heard Chrissy rattling about in the kitchen. And I thought, oh God, what sort of mess is she making now? And I went in and I went to open the door and she said, no, Michael, don't come in. I'm cooking your supper. I wish you could have seen it. There was a pile of knives and forks on the kitchen table and a plate with 2 burnt sausages and a banana. So I picked up a knife and a fork and I sat down and I started to eat, and she said, no, Michael, no, don't eat yet. I've done you some gravy. I know you like gravy with your sausages. And she got a saucepan and she poured this horrible, bubbly, slimy, steaming grey goop all over the sausages. I learned what had happened later in the evening when we were having hot chocolate before she went to bed. We always used to talk about what we'd done during the day, even though we'd done it together. Again, it was just keeping the grey cells going. And she told me that when I went off to teach, she decided that she'd cook my supper, sausages with gravy. But first she'd clean out the kitchen. And she went into the pantry and she was cleaning things out and she was recognising things and putting things back in their place, and then she came across something that she didn't recognise, and she read what it was and thought, I'm going to do this, I'll do this, and then it'll show Michael that I can still do things. It was kettle descaler. And she read the instructions and she did exactly what it said on the instructions. She poured it all into the kettle, she topped it up with water and put it on to boil. And then, of course, she forgot about it. Then the alarm went off. The alarm that I always used to set to warn her that I'd be home in 5 minutes. And she started to panic. She had to make some gravy and she went back into the cupboard and she got the red box that she knew was gravy granules, and she did exactly what it said on the box. She heaped 3 heaped tablespoons into the saucepan and topped it up with the boiling water out of the kettle. Stirred it up. I said it looked delicious. I said I'd save it later. After she'd gone to bed, I'd mop it up with some crispy bread that I got, and so I sat down and I scraped it off my sausages, and she sat opposite me smiling proudly. And I ate my 3 sausages. And my banana. It was the most delicious meal I've ever had. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I should have listened to the vicar, shouldn't I mean, Chrissy wouldn't have wanted this. She'd have wanted us to be happy. She'd have wanted me to tell jokes about funny times and how we used to laugh and laugh and laugh and not make you sad and not make me sad. I mean, I can remember once toasting some tea cakes and making a pot of tea and saying to her, come on, let's go and have tea in the conservatory, Chrissy. And she said, oh, have we got a conservatory? Which way is it? And you see, I could cope with all that. I could cope with the forgetfulness, the muddle-headedness, having to dress her, having to bathe her. But then, when the swearing started, and the violence, and the incontinence, the worst day in my whole life, worse even than the day Chrissy died, was the day I drove home from the care home, leaving her behind. And I looked in my rear view mirror and I saw her standing at the window, waving to me. And they were wonderful with her. Everyone was wonderful with her, with me. Kept telling me it was the right thing to do. It was the right thing for Chrissy and the right thing for me, and I know it was the right thing to do, but it doesn't matter what anyone says. Nothing will stop me feeling guilty that I deserted my wife. I'm going to stop in a minute. I didn't intend it to be like this. Thank you for your phone calls and your texts, the cards, the flowers. I couldn't have coped without you and without John. He'll switch it off in a minute. He's asked me to ask you something. Can you please all get in touch with him and send him your email addresses? It appears that in a couple of years' time, I have a really, really important birthday. And John wants to give me a surprise birthday party. And he'd like to invite you all, and I'd love you all to come. I'd love you all to be there. It's a couple of years, 2-3 years, and it will help, won't it? I won't be over it, but I'll be a lot better, and I'll drink and I'll dance, and we'll laugh and we'll remember. I'm going to go and sit in a room with my friend Johnny Walker for a while. Say goodbye to Chrissy on my own. Don't be strangers. It only takes a little message. Keep safe.